Hello, you multi. Murderers' mothers. Bit of a gruesome one, that one. But hey, we are coming up to Halloween before too long. And thank you to Sheila B. Malty for providing a malt mention introducing Ralphie Review 1049 here at the Whiskey Bothy, because that's where you are. Now, the Whiskey Bothy is not a fancy bar. Oh, no. Nothing like that. You will not find any boutique leather-clad armchairs and roaring baronial fires with this distant waft of nostalgic bagpipe music in the background. I tend to avoid these cliches here, cliches in this channel. The Bothy, by the way, is absolutely authentically Scottish. If you do a search for Scottish Bothies, you will probably find you're going down a very interesting rabbit hole of discovery as to these very primitive basic buildings that provide valuable shelter to those who take the time and make the time to discover, engage and connect and walk through the landscape of Scotland and the Scottish Isles. Anyway, what am I going to read for you in this review when... I'll try that again. What am I going to review for you in this review if I don't actually have a glass and a bottle of whiskey? Well, I'm going to tell you a story instead. But I'll start with the reason why. I don't know if you've noticed, but Ralphie, it's me, is absolutely stuffied with the cold. And I've been blowing green snot out my nose for the last week. Yeah, it doesn't sound very nice. I don't want to spoil your malt moments, but I'm just telling you how it is, you know. It's what you get in this channel. So, I really am not in a position to actually review a whisky for you objectively. Although I do have tasting notes for my next whisky review, and although I've had colds in the past, I've been able to use my nose. But this time, my nose is smelling absolutely nothing, so I'm not even going to try and fake it for you. Meanwhile, I'm going to improvise and give you a whisky story instead. And it's based on... I'm going to start with one of the chapters in my second book, Tales from a Whisky Bar. And it's called Drama at Glenclyde. Now, Glenclyde is a warehouse on the banks of the Clyde down at a location called Bowling, which is just west of Glasgow before you hit really the Clyde estuary. And it's exactly the sort of place that you would store casks of whisky. In fact, right next door to the fictional Glenclyde, you do have extensive Pernod Ricard warehouses. And I have to say that there are times in the past that I would cycle past in the morning on my bicycle on the disused railway track that ran down the banks of the river, and you'd get the most magnificent smell of maturing whisky. But the drama at the Glenclyde is to do with a theft that went on from the warehouse, which was a crisis for the two honest and decent workers who were manning the place and doing the best of their job to the best of their ability with very little recognition. In fact, what they got in return was basically passive, ambient, I wouldn't call it, well, I call it hate. Disdain. Disdain's a good word, from their boss. Somewhere else in a constant air-conditioned office. And these stories that I've got in the book are very much inspired and are written around the conversations I've had in the early years, in the 1980s, when I was living in Glasgow in a place called Partick. A small Clydeside North Bank community, which I have to say is remarkably intact today and is fast becoming Little Korea. It's becoming Glasgow's Koreatown, which is actually, I totally get it. I was recently in Glasgow, which hence the reason I picked up the cold, which in fact I got from a distillery owner. Yeah, because it's you can pinpoint the moment in time when it happens. But there we go. That's another story for another day. In fact, I'm not going to tell that one. Partick was a real traditional community place with lots of pubs on the main street called Dumbarton Road. And in going into the pubs, you'd meet the locals who worked in the whisky industry and whose parents had worked in the whisky industry. And when you're sitting down of an evening with them over a few gin and tonics, a pint and perhaps a wee glass of Bunnahabhain, 12-year-old, you'd pick up the stories they were telling. Initially they'd tell you the story, and then people would join the table, and then it would morph into other stories. People would want to start chipping in because they themselves get their memories triggered. And this particular story is relating to Little Mill Distillery, which is situated directly opposite the fictional Glenclyde warehouses. And in fact, Little Mill features at a moment in time where it had been abandoned, shockingly neglected by its owners, disgracefully so, actually. And the two protagonists in that particular chapter are taking a wander round where fires have been lit and graffitis in the wall and the roof's been burnt, and the fixtures and fittings have been stripped out for salvage. And they're being nostalgic about the old days because it's easy to do. In fact, the whisky industry wants you to buy into this nostalgia. They will supply it to you, heavily vetted, heavily redacted, and completely sanitised. They want you to buy into some Sir Walter Scott style schmaltzy, flannelly, violet flavoured BS that they feel is appropriate. They tend to update it a wee bit. There's not quite so much tartan on show anymore. But it's never, the sentiment has never changed. And it comes a point, particularly with the bigger companies, that it becomes absolutely insincere and just becomes grating because it's so fake. It's so transparently false. And it's ugly because the genuine characters of the old days are nothing more than out of focus, reproduced photographs stuck in the wall to give some semblances to the antiquity of the Scotch whisky industry, which you will find in Springbank and not a lot of other distilleries, just to ground you back into the factual world here. But it's a Little Mill. It's one of these distilleries, a lowland distillery, producing a wonderful creamy, soft textured lemon sorbet almost, soft citrus, mild grain style of single malt. But people back in the 1990s who were buying it discovered that likes of Cadenheads and Douglas Lang, who were prominent bottlers of Little Mill, and there were very few official bottlings because the official bottlers weren't interested. They just weren't interested, to be honest, period, in my opinion. And what you had was a lovely, light, delicate, complex, characterful dram which just needed a bit of time to get to where it was going. But now and again, people would get a bottle from the independent bottles and it was just rank rotten. It was appalling. It was soapy. It was off-key. The grain could be sour. There could be a stench of Parma violets off it. And other bottlings, they would have it, it's an unpeated single malt, and it would have little notes of carbolic and phenol notes in it, and yet be clean as a whistle. And I don't think a lot of whisky aficionados actually got to the bottom of this, because they simply didn't have the literal point of reference as to the way things worked in the old days that I learned from visiting a local pub in Glasgow in the 1980s. And people will tell you plenty when they're sober. They'll tell you even more when they're pissed, particularly when you're buying them a drink. Then they'll really tell you what they know you want to know. And the conditions in the distilleries in the old days were often brutal and harsh. This idea of the distillery owner as some benign benefactor who's extending the gracious hand of generosity over his extended family, also known as the workers. Don't you kid yourself for 1 minute. There were competent and professional whisky makers who tended to look after their staff, but there were also other whisky makers who didn't give a shit about their team. They were very poorly paid, and they had to resort to petty thievery, to at times make ends meet. They had to steal new make spirit out to the distillery, literally not just for themselves, but to actually sell down the pub so they can. And what their deal was, they'd sell the whisky in the pub, but the pub, his wife would go into the pub to get the cash to feed their children. Now, you don't hear any of this from the brand ambassadors, and you never will, because they don't have a clue. This is the harsh old days that they try and airbrush gently out of the narrative with the sanitised, oldie-worldy photographs, and you see it in the Pathé news clips that appear, and just put Pathé News Whisky. Do a search in Google, YouTube, and you'll get these nice, with chirpy wee Highlandy music going on, and oh hi, here comes the laird, and there's the workers, and they're all grinning away, and they're rolling the barrels all together, all at once, like Snow White's Seven Dwarfs. I mean, give me a break here, people. Please understand how rehearsed and fake all these setups are for these Pathé News clips that you will watch. What you will learn is that in the old days, whisky was handmade, and it was constant manual labour. Heavy manual labour. And to a certain extent, if you're standing in a washback with a big bristle scrubbing brush, and it's not only just a half cooled down, and you're giving it a good scrub down from top to toe, you'll soon know about what hard grafts is as well. Or if you're in a warehouse, manhandling casks day in, day out, until until you actually need wrist support in your wrists. Then, this is why it really, really pisses me off when I see brand ambassadors saying to people, oh yes, drink whiskey any way you want, put in the ginger beer and put in the Coca-Cola because it's your unique experience. Absurd. See, when you're drinking whiskey, never ever forget how much hard physical labour has been put in by the least rewarded people in the entire production stream. Never ever you forget that. Because even now, the sentimentality that people buy into around the whiskey scene, it really just lights my fuse. This is one reason why you'll notice me keeping a distance. And when I see people knocking back whisky at whisky festivals, they're no longer stopping to taste. They're just at a bun fight. That's what it is. They've filled up their stomachs with pies and sandwiches, and they're there to get their money's worth. And they're going for the high cask strength stuff first. And if that dram lasts 10 minutes, it's lucky. So it's not just the producers. there's some of the drinkers and consumers of whiskey now, it really gets to me. And it really pisses me off. And how can we recalibrate our approach to whiskey? How can we reground ourselves? I'll tell you why. Read some of the proper, authentic historical books. Look at some of these old newsreels, the Pathe, P-A-T-H-E with a circumflex, newsreels. And see that whiskey must be treated with respect. Because if you're not respecting it, if you're guzzling it and gulping it and knocking it back and all the rest of it, and it's good stuff, you're wasting your time, you're wasting your money, and when you're doing it in public, you're wasting your reputation. I conclude by saying that in my next review, 1049 Extras, I'm going to go back to Little Mill and give you a Little Mill story that explains why these historical bottlings from this distillery are so intermittent, and you will find it very, very interesting.